Look at a map of Europe, and you will see an industrial titan dominating the very center of the continent. But this visual dominance hides a profound and historical strategic anxiety. Geography does not directly dictate aggression, but it absolutely dictates fear, and fear dictates strategic doctrine. The map you are looking at is entirely deceptive and deeply unforgiving to its inhabitants. It is a misconception that Almania lacks any natural borders to protect its core territories. The Alps provide a formidable, almost impenetrable physical shield to the deep south of the country. The Rhine also offers a highly significant and historically bloody defensive line in the west. These barriers offer immense security, but they only protect a specific fraction of the entire nation. The legendary rivers like the Rhine and the Elbe are absolute miracles for internal industrial trade. They allowed a previously divided land to connect, industrialize, and grow incredibly rich together. But from a strictly military perspective, these massive rivers run in the wrong strategic direction entirely. They flow north to south, while major historical invasions typically come from east to west. A river that runs perpendicular to your enemy's marching route is nothing but a temporary delay. It is certainly not an impenetrable wall that can permanently save an entire exposed nation. The true geopolitical crisis lies in the east and the north, across the vast Kuzey-Avrupa Ovaz. This flat, unbroken expanse stretches directly from the French coast deep into the Russian steppes. It functions as a massive continental highway that leaves Germany's vital flanks entirely exposed to rapid invasion. There are no towering mountain ranges to naturally absorb or slow down an advancing army. There are no impassable wastelands or wide deserts to serve as a natural physical buffer zone. It is a geographic reality that practically begs marching armies to cross it as rapidly as possible. To understand modern German military behavior, you must look at its historical predecessor, Prussia. Prussia was born directly out of this extreme geographic vulnerability on the flat, swampy northern plains. Lacking natural physical defenses and possessing a relatively small population, the early Prussian state faced constant existential dread. They were completely surrounded by much larger, hostile empires on almost all of their borders. This intense, permanent fear forced them to create a society built entirely around the concept of rapid military mobilization. They essentially became a heavily disciplined army that possessed a state, rather than a normal country. They pioneered modern conscription, invented the general staff system, and heavily utilized railways for swift troop movements. Their survival depended entirely on a highly preemptive and structurally aggressive military doctrine. They had to strike first to neutralize a sudden threat before it could cross the open plains. This preemptive nature was designed to solve Germany's greatest geopolitical nightmare, the terrifying two-front war. Being geographically stuck in the center of Europe meant constantly managing the fragile continental balance of power. Otto von Bismarck's ultimate diplomatic nightmare was a simultaneous military alliance between France in the west and Russia in the east. Facing potential crushing pressure from both directions, they developed strict defensive protocols to ensure their survival. German military planners developed a rigid one war at a time doctrine to survive this central geographic trap. The infamous Schlieffen Plan was a direct, mathematical calculation born from this terrifying geographic reality. They believed they had to rapidly defeat the French forces before the massive Russian army could fully mobilize. The eastern plains offered no natural defense, so extreme speed became their only reliable defensive shield. But military and territorial security was only half of the complex and dangerous German geopolitical equation. Economic survival and access to global resources presented an equally terrifying challenge for their rapidly industrializing empire. As a massive industrial titan, the country was entirely dependent on imported raw materials to fuel its economy. They needed vast amounts of external energy and food to sustain their rapid growth and population. However, Germany's access to the global ocean is geographically choked by narrow straits and easily blocked. The Balt-Denizli coastline is essentially a massive, shallow maritime cage for a global naval fleet. To reach the open Atlantic, ships must pass through chokepoints that can be contested and mined. They could never project the sustained naval power required to secure overseas colonies and vital trade routes. Even their North Sea ports face a monumental geographic obstacle that they simply cannot easily overcome. The island of Buyuk, Britannia sits directly across the water, acting as a massive, unsinkable strategic barrier. A dominant British fleet could choke maritime trade and sever supply lines. This geographic maritime cage created a severe resource vulnerability that deeply influenced aggressive ground strategies in the past. This lack of a deep, uncontested sea lane meant Germany could never reliably import food and energy during a total war. A simple naval blockade could literally push the civilian population to the brink, as the First World War's blockade demonstrated. The dark historical concept of Lebensraum, or living space, had a strong economic component. Because they could not dominate open oceans with equal ease, key strategists looked at land as the most controllable source of resources. The endless fertile fields of Eastern Europe became the tragic object of this geography-influenced resource logic. That logic, mixed with ideology and imperial competition, produced catastrophic consequences. The aftermath of those conflicts resulted in the ultimate realization of Germany's absolute worst geopolitical nightmare. The nation was literally torn, occupied, and turned into the front line of the Cold War. The flat German plains became the heavily armed frontier between superpowers. After reunification, political leaders and strategists understood that trying to secure the continent by force was both impossible and immoral. You cannot conquer a continent when your own geography refuses to give you a secure operational base. Modern Germany was forced to completely rewrite its strategic playbook to survive the new era. Instead of pursuing physical border expansion, the state pivoted heavily toward deep economic interdependence. The European Union functions as an extraordinary non-kinetic buffer zone against the historical curse of the Middle. By weaving economies together, Berlin reduced the incentive for military confrontation. By deeply integrating the economies of former rivals, they secured their exposed flanks without firing a single shot. They tied the industrial success of neighboring states to their own prosperity and turned potential enemies into essential partners. But this modern, civilized strategy brought a new class of vulnerabilities. An economy deeply integrated with the continent becomes dependent on energy and supply chains that cross vast distances. The historical fear of a direct military invasion has been partly replaced by the modern fear of supply disruption and energy starvation. When critical imports are cut, industry grinds to a halt far faster than a 19th-century general would expect. Beneath this polished economic exterior, the unforgiving geographic facts remain. The flat plains still exist. The rivers still do not form an east-west shield. The seas still present choke points. To truly understand modern European history is to acknowledge this layered dilemma. Geography produces fear, institutions convert fear into policy. Every diplomatic move is still haunted by those older anxieties, even if today's tools are trade agreements instead of cannon.